the most important Jewish language, Yiddish, which means Jewish, the Jewish language, which was the language of the Ashkenazi Jews, the Jews of Eastern Europe. We could talk about why those people are important. Other people are obviously important too. But for historical purposes, they are the most important group to understand modern Judaism. And those people
that's
in
quite
Yiddish,
a statement, but all right, let's say that for a different discussion.
It's just, okay, I need to clarify because I'm going to get crucified here. So it's not that these are more important people, but at the turn of the 20th century, and when the modern period began, 9 out of 10 Jews in the world were Ashkenazi Jews living in the Pale of Settlement, where Ukraine, Poland, or they already migrated to America, or they were from there but migrated to France and Germany. But nearly all the Jews in the world were Yiddish-speaking or descendants of Yiddish-speaking Jews. Nearly all the Jews who settled in Palestine and founded the state of Israel, nearly all of them came from there. Zionism happened there. It didn't happen in Morocco, which had a substantial number of Jews. But it's only because there were so many of them. There were millions of there, and then there were a few thousands in other communities.
So today, I think over 50% of the population of Israel is said to be of Mizrahi or so-called Sephardic. So how did that happen that you go from 90% to 50?
Now it's not so significant. But that happened because there was a systematic murder of those Jews in the Holocaust. And the ones that didn't migrate to Israel and didn't migrate to America, most of American Jews are Ashkenazi. I think it is around 90% there. So in Israel...
It's less now because of all the people who've left Israel. But when I was growing up in Chicago, it was rare to encounter a Sephardic Jew. Like it was a noteworthy event. Like, oh, there's 30 kids in my class, and one of them is a Sephardi, and they do this different thing, and
In Montreal, where my family comes from, or my mother's side, it's more common because it's French-speaking kind of country.
So they came from North Africa.
So North African Jews could immigrate there, and they spoke French, so it was more convenient. But even
you have
there,
to figure what kind of Jew wants to go to a cold place like Chicago. Somebody who comes from a northern climate anyway. So maybe that was a self-selecting group, right? All right. So Israel today is something like 50% non-Ashkenazi, but you're saying that's mostly because of the Holocaust.
So the people who immigrated early to Israel, the founders of the state of Israel, these are the people involved in the reviving of the Hebrew language, the people founding the kibbutzim in Tel Aviv, and all the chalutzim, what you think of as Zionism.
Pioneers,
The pioneers, the chalutzim. The founding fathers, not only the leaders of the country, but also the people working in the factories and working in the farms and fighting in the early IDF and what was before the IDF. Those are by far Ashkenazi Jews coming from Eastern Europe. That's where Zionism happened. That's where most Jews lived. It's not because why is this the case? There were much more Jews there. Most Jews weren't Zionists. Most Jews either stayed there, were part of the Bund, or they migrated to America. A small minority. There were so many Jews there that even when a tiny minority are crazy enough to think that they can go and live in Palestine and start their own country, that was enough to actually succeed in doing that. There were smaller numbers in other places, say Morocco, which had one of the biggest communities outside of Ashkenaz, but they didn't really have nationalism developed there. The ideas of nationalism and Zionism is a form of nationalism, a Jewish nationalism, were later to appear there. And it just didn't happen there. That's not where it happened. That Jewish community did migrate to Israel, but they migrated 10, 20 years later during the 50s and even the 60s. So that's why when we talk about the effect, there's the Arabic that they spoke, Jewish Moroccan Arabic. If they would have been the people who revived the Hebrew language, then we would see a lot of effect of that form of Arabic on the Hebrew language. That's
It just so happens the current head of the Academy of the Hebrew Language, if I'm not mistaken, isn't it Aharon Maman, who is a Moroccan Jew?
And the one before that.
Moshe Balashel was Moroccan.
Moshe Balashel. So this is not what's it called, not to say, and there are a significant, very important in the group of Ben Yehuda, who was Ashkenazi. There were very important non-Ashkenazi leaders in that group. But so I don't want to exclude anyone, but it is a historical fact that these are the people who did it. So that's why there is an enormous effect of Yiddish on modern Hebrew.
This brings us to Yiddish. So we were talking about the directions, north, south, east, west.
Exactly. So why do we use the particular, these particular words, Tzafon, Dorom, Mizrach, Marav, and not Yama, Teman, and all these other options that we could have used from the Bible? Because those were the words in Yiddish. And Yiddish is this, it's full of Hebrew words. It's
what percent? I don't know Yiddish. Do you know? What percentage of Hebrew words? I know like some words too.
And I don't know. It's impossible to speak in percentages of words.
Okay.
I've been trying to do that with Hebrew, like modern Hebrew, with dictionaries. Like it's very difficult.
So let me ask this. So when my great grandfather was speaking Yiddish in Lithuania, in Vilna, in 1905. He probably couldn't go through a day going, and I'm asking this as a question really, could he go through a day going to the market or the, whatever he was doing without speaking Hebrew words? That's really...
No, that would be he couldn't carry a conversation. Maybe a few sentences, but Hebrew is, Yiddish is full of Hebrew words and very, very basic words. Maybe I'll give an example. I'm not fluent in Yiddish or anything, but okay. We were just talking about the north, south, east, and west. So you would say you would use the Hebrew words, Tzafon, Dorom, Mizrach, Marav.
So in other words, Hebrew had a bunch of different words for north, but the word that modern Hebrew chose was the influence of Yiddish. That Yiddish had preserved this Hebrew word. Is that what you're saying?
The way to see it is really modern Hebrew adopted the Yiddish word for north, south, east,
which happened to be a Hebrew word.
This happened to be a Hebrew word. Now, when the people who revived the Hebrew language, they were aware of this and then maybe a little embarrassed of this. But what they were really doing, they were not exactly reviving the Hebrew language from scratch, because that is something impossible to do. What they were doing really is they were taking Yiddish, and whenever there was a non-Hebrew word in Yiddish, they looked and replaced it with a word in a Hebrew word. So they were going through this process of cleaning Yiddish of the non-Hebrew words in it. So if the word was Hebrew, we can keep that.
I never heard it described that way. What's an example of a Yiddish word that's Germanic or Slavic that's used in modern Hebrew?
So they're exceedingly rare, because what they were doing, what they were trying to do is quash those words. Now, like if there was a word like that, they would get rid of it. There's an exception. If the word, and we have these discussions that are written down. If the word is international, in other words, they don't really talk about the language they're speaking. They're speaking amongst each other in Yiddish, but they don't. The protocol is written in Hebrew, and they're not acknowledging, because they're embarrassed about the fact that they're speaking Yiddish.
Okay.
So they say international words we don't have to replace. Now, what do they mean by that?
Yeah, what's an international word?
If Yiddish uses a word and it's international, if also the other languages are using it, so that's an okay word. So say
I don't know, like chemia or something like that. Would that be an example?
Chemia, chemistry. Okay. So you would have to replace a word like that, but no. But they use it also in Russian and also in what's it called? So that's an okay international word.
Okay.
Or let's say
It's also something that's inherently modern, right? In other words, they didn't have chemistry in the time of the Talmud, so
That doesn't matter because also other
that didn't
modern
matter.
things. We replaced
Okay.
the electricity. We replaced with chashmal, which is a biblical
Oh,
word.
okay. There you go.
So they will replace everything. But if it's an international word, they would go out of their way to. They would say, okay, that's okay.
Or
Say
università, maybe it would be. Would that be in
Università.
the time? Okay.
Università. Ben Yehuda actually
University.
did do Michlala that was supposed to replace
Oh,
Università,
okay.
but
There
now
you
it's a
go.
college. But now it's used for college, but it was supposed to be for university. But there's 1,000 of them, like all these words that end with tia, yeah, like where we have in English shin it's tia in Hebrew, and those are just the Yiddish word. Okay. Now the
So
reason
yeah, go ahead.
those
Sorry.
the reason those made the cut is they said, okay, those are international words. They use them also in English, also in French. So we'll continue. Those are okay. It's not like it's proper. Also, that's a telephone, telegraph, stuff like that.
And
Modern.
not for lack of trying, right? Ben Yehuda made a word for telephone, just nobody uses it.
The Sachachok is I don't think it's him actually, but
somebody
made up a word and that never really caught on.
Okay.
But other things, say many other modern inventions, planes, cars, they have in Hebrew words.
There's a bunch of words that come into modern Hebrew from Yiddish, but it's more complex than that. Basically, they were trying to take Yiddish and Hebraize it, is what you're really saying.
Because the basic grammar of Hebrew, the sentence structure, where it's very Yiddish. Okay, the backbone is Yiddish. The way we turns of phrases. Also, there's a lot of phrases like Hebrew phrases that we say, or Aramaic phrases. We say that means a baker does not give his opinion on the quality of his dough. It's a way to say, like, somebody else should comment. You shouldn't comment.
Yeah, but does that come from, and I don't know the answer here, does that come from Yiddish or does that come from like the Talmud?
Yeah, so this would be used in Yiddish. Nearly all the phrases.
No, but what I'm asking is it originally Yiddish? Is it a German phrase, a Germanic phrase that's now translated into Hebrew, or it's?
I know. I think this is from rabbinic literature, I believe.
Okay, right. Where, and as a contrast, you bring the example in one of your videos of "to close your fly," which that actually is a Germanic phrase now translated into Hebrew, right? Meaning your zip of your pants, right?
Yeah. Although in the comments to that, people have been telling me that in Lebanese Arabic they use it, in French they use something similar, in Brazil they use something similar, and in Turkish they use something similar, which I was unaware of. So it seems like it's almost international. I would assume, since these people are all mother tongue Yiddish speakers, that they would take it from Yiddish. But I cannot be completely confident about that anymore, because it seems that everywhere around the world people say the same thing. Apparently,
so just to explain to let's back up. So the modern Hebrew word for a fly, which is the thing you zip up at the front of a man's pants, well, tell us what that is. Not the
zipper, the opening itself, the fly.
Opening itself. Okay, so tell us about that. Because I've seen the video, most people haven't. So tell us that story.
So we have flies. Hebrew doesn't have a word for that. I don't know where the English word for fly came from. It couldn't be that ancient because people didn't have flies in ancient times. So there's no word for this. But what there is once you see somebody and their fly is open, you say, "Achanut shelcha ptucha," or "Sgo et achanut," which literally means close either close your store or your store is open. Now, this is a phrase used in Yiddish, and it turns out in many languages. When you see somebody, in English, we would say XYZ, or XYZ, if you're American.
Examine your zipper.
Examine your zipper. But apparently in many languages, you say, "Oh, you left your store open, you should close your store." I think there's like a sexual connotation here, as if the wares...
I'm not sure. I think it comes from people had these little kiosks, and the store was like, you would open up like a little awning and that was the store, right? So you're looking now into the...
It implied that your wares are your Your
maybe. Yeah, I don't know.
yeah,
All right.
everyone can see your wares.
But the point is, they didn't use the word chanus or something like this in Yiddish, which is the Hebrew word for store, chanut, right? I'm asking, right? Didn't they use a Germanic word?
Use the German word, right?
Okay, that was what I was asking.
Something like that.
Okay.
So this was translated. In other words, these people, once again, we're going back to the how the Hebrew was born. So suddenly, all these people from Eastern Europe were moving to Palestine.
Yeah.
People often think of the end of the 19th century, like Ben Yehuda figures, but really, that's like a prequel to the story, because in 1900 there were a handful of people that were speaking Hebrew, a few crazy families living in Jerusalem that were like, we're speaking, it's sort of like people raising their family in Klingon. Now, there are some people that could do that. There's like attempts with Cornish in England, but there's even the 1900 Encyclopedia Britannica and their article of about Hebrew. So it gives a scholarly thing about the Hebrew language, and at the end they say currently in Palestine there are some people trying to revive the Hebrew language, but this is doomed to fail. And it's like,
did they really say that?
That's crazy awesome. People, and it's like he doesn't treat it at all like seriously.
Okay.
And it wasn't serious at this point. But what happened is 20 years later, at the end of World War I, when an international agreement said that Palestine will become the land of the Jews, at that point, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands eventually of Jews moved from Eastern Europe and settled in Palestine. And that concerted effort between the end of World War I and the founding of the state, that is the nation building period. And at that point, we have thousands of Jews coming from Eastern Europe, or mostly from Eastern Europe, settling in towns and cities. And those people are suddenly, most of them speak Yiddish, and they suddenly are forced to speak Hebrew. So
why are they forced? And it's a real question. I don't know the answer. Like, in other words, if you go to the Walmart down the street from my house and you go to ask for something, you better go with Google Dictionary. I'm not trying to be funny. Yeah. And you may have to pull up literally Arabic. You might have to pull up Spanish. If you want to know where the cold medicine is, and you ask in English, and this literally has happened to me. I literally had to pull up on my phone and look up the Arabic word for cold medicine. And then immediately I was, okay, it's with hands, it's over there. So why were they forced? That's my question, right? Because you could live in another country and never learn the language. My great-grandfather, I don't know that he spoke English to the day he died, right? He lived in America for 30 years.
I think these people are not like immigrants. They're not people moving to a different country to build a better life for themselves or their children. These are people who are moved to, like, they have a historic purpose. They're a part of an international movement. They're living in history. They're reviving a ancient
So it's
nation.
Ideologically motivated, is I think what you're saying.
By 100%. These are because
so they dafka don't want to speak Yiddish. They want to speak Hebrew.
Exactly. They're very aware of this. They're doing something historical. Like the people who were looking for a better life, they moved to America. The people who moved to Palestine, those are the crazy people who are really feeling a part of a movement of Zionism.